Hello and welcome to our last Unit 6, which is using other editing tools. First, I need you to bring up this picture called Students at the Capitol. So if you could please go to your share drive and go into the Unit 6 pictures under Photoshop, and there you will find Students at Capitol. Now that it's open, make sure you go to Image, Duplicate, go ahead and say OK. And make sure to close the original file, and we're just going to work with the copy file. Now, the first editing tool we're going to deal with is the blur tool. If you come over to right underneath the path selection tool, or above rather, the path selection tool, you will find the blur tool. If you press and hold it, you'll see that there are three tools in one: blur, sharpen, smudge. Yes, we are definitely going to continue to work just with the blur tool. And let's suppose that I wanted to blur just sections of this white column. Well, it would be easier if I first selected the column, because otherwise here I go, attempt to blur it like this, it will blur everything else in its path as well, possibly even things I don't intend to. So I'm going to undo that. This time I'm going to zoom in to the white column, and I'm going to make a selection first using my magic wand. Now I have to make sure that on the top palette it says New Selection, and as I choose some, I can change it to Add to Selection and continue to increase. Now notice my tolerance is at 32, and it went a little over on that last selection, so I'm going to undo, Control Z, that last selection, or I can just go up into my history palette. But I'm going to just select as much as I can without going over of the columns. But you know, you've already learned a little bit about masking, so honestly I'm just going to go over to the quick mask, and I need the white to be up, so I'm going to switch the foreground and backgrounds, because I have to get my brush and make sure that this whole white column, there is no red in it, because remember, red is the masked part, and I don't want this to be masked. I want it to be selected. Now I'm not going to do a 100% perfect job on this because this is a video, time provided here, and I did enough of it that I'm going to stop and go back to standard mode. Now I have a general selection. This is the best way now where I can go back to my blur tool. Within my blur tool, I have my strength at 100%. I may want to put that down more to 50 because sometimes it just overdoes it. So I have in the 50 range. Now I'm going to brush over the column, and notice I'm going to hold down my mouse, not releasing it, until I get substantially close to the blur that I desire. And I'm going to over blur it because I would like to show you another function. So let's suppose I over blurred it. Then I could say Edit, Fade Blur Tool. Then I can change the opacity of the blur, and watch, since I have preview checked, how if I go to 75 I get a little bit more back. That's even better. If I go to 50% opacity on the blur, or thereabouts, all of a sudden, look at, it's even better. I'm going to keep it more at like 75% and say OK. So it's blurred, but not too much so. It just won't be, the faces will stand out more than the background column. OK, I am going to undo this blur, and I'm going to go back up to where it says Exit Quick Mask, and this time I'd like to use a filter blur. I'm going to say Filter and go to the blur option. Within the blur, I want to choose the Gaussian blur, and notice it has the column selected. And let's everybody type in, let's say it shows the preview of how it would blur it at pixels of 3. If you do pixels of 6, see the preview now. Pixels of 9, whoo, it's getting worse and worse. Well, that gets even worse. I really think pixels of 3 would just about do it. Say OK, and there you go. Deselect, and your blur has worked. Now let's go on to the next section, which is dealing with smudging. Now a lot of you use this when you did the head replacement. And so let's go ahead and say View, Fit on Screen. Find the smudge tool first off. Notice it's Blur, Sharpen, and Smudge, and the next tool we'll talk about is Sharpen. Choose the smudge. Let's suppose that we would like to smudge this bug right here on Dominic's shirt so that it no longer is going to be there. We just want to kind of smudge it in. Let's try that. Let's zoom in on the bug on Dominic's shirt. The bug, the bug, the bug. Here we go. Okay. Now, I could actually, yes, there are multiple ways to get rid of this, but let's suppose I wanted to try a smudge. I'm going to click on my smudge, and notice the strength is at 50 because, again, sometimes it gets pretty bad. And notice you can go to different modes. Well, first off, if I try to just kind of, here we go. I start in a section that's good, and I'm going to smudge it in, and smudge it around until eventually you will see that I'm going to do a pretty good job at just getting rid of that little bug in my own little way, but maintaining somewhat of the consistency of the shirt. Okay? Where see that there's different gradients and whatnot in the shirt color due to lighting effects and whatnot. So we could very well smudge things in, and even with this white spot over here, you can smudge to get rid of the white spot, right? But you do have to pay attention to the strength. Now let's go back up in our history palette and let's get that bug back, and let's go back up and get the smudge back. Now I actually did over 20, so I'm just going to go all the way back up in history to Students at the Capitol and go back to my original file. Now that we have done the little smudge, let's suppose though that we smudged it a little bit and we wanted instead to bring this bug much more enhanced, or we could bring this map to a more enhanced version. Let's just bring the bug. We want it to stand out a little bit more. We're going to say Sharpen. Now watch, the strength of mine is at 50 again, so be careful because if I put it at 100, you just watch what happens. Okay, come on. Come on, Mr. 100. I'm just going to highlight it and type 100%. Okay, now watch. If I, oh, good Lord, because it's at 100%, it is amazing what it's doing. Look at it is the way that the sharpen tool works. It's the actual opposite of the blur tool. It tries to improve the focus of the edges that are soft so that the image appears clearer, but then it becomes to the point where it improves the focus so much that it's over focused. So again, now I could say edit, fade, and this time I'd probably have to fade it to almost, what, let's try 10%. Okay, now let's try 20%. And again, you can do the edit, fade with even the smudge tool as well. And just like we did edit, fade with the blur tool. So let's say, I don't know, that 20 is a little bit much too. It's because my strength was at 100. So I'm going to just keep it at edit, fade at 15%. I still have a few edges here that are a little sharper than I want. But okay, maybe we brought the bug a little better in view, just because. Who knows why? Just because. So again, it's going to be crucial whenever you deal with the brush. I highly encourage you to use with the smudge tool, with the blur tool, and the sharpen tool. More of a 50% strength is suggested. Onward and upward using the eraser. Now remember, we have 3 different eraser tools: normal, background, and magic. Let's just start with the basic eraser first. Noting that we have a background locked layer on our layers palette, we're going to say View, Fit on Screen, and let's just go ahead and get a really extraordinarily large brush just so we can see what we're doing, to like 190. Let's go over to the shirt by where the map is, where it says the Technology Mackle Conference. And let's go ahead and let's just say, okay, we want to erase it. Find out what happens on the background layer when you try to erase. it erased to a white. Did it actually erase it? By George, it did, but it erased to a color. Let's undo that. Now let's see if we were to double click on you over here and just change this. You can rename it. We can say background again. And notice we no longer have a locked layer. Now, let's go ahead, get rid of the eraser mark, and it's no longer locked. What happens if you take that same eraser now? It erases to transparency instead of erasing to a white background. That's the difference when you have a locked versus unlocked layer. Let's click undo or just go back up in history. And let's just remember some of the basics in terms of using the background eraser now. In using the background eraser, it's just important to realize basically it erases to a transparency regardless of whatever layer you're on. It's just going to make it transparent. And so basically, if you take the background eraser, if you change your brush size a little bit so it's pretty large, and then you just go on to your picture and start erasing, you're going to see it's just going to erase to transparency. The one little thing that they do have in terms of on the options bar at the top, they have, for example, my tolerance is at 50, so it erases a range of similar colors. So if I try to go over to, let's say, the technology stamp, look, it's just erasing but not completely. If I really, really want to erase everything, I better take it all up to 100%, and then it will more easily erase everything I'm looking for. Also, watch as I have a foreground color that if let's say it matched the timestamp like mine does. If I click Protect Foreground Color, you can do this by zooming in to the timestamp and then clicking on your foreground color and choosing with your little, there we go, your little dropper here, a good sampling of the color. Say OK. Now watch when I'm going to zoom out a little bit just so you can see the full picture. Get back my background eraser. I have Protect Foreground Color selected, and if I go across, it's going to some extent protect it, but not 100% because actually there's some variation with the colors as well, even on the timestamp. If I want to completely delete it, I just deselect Protect Foreground Color, and yes, it will in fact, I may have to go over it a few times, but it will get rid of my coloration. Okay, let's go back up in the history palette until we go right before we made our first background eraser deletion, and let's just very quickly talk about the magic eraser, which we have used before to get rid of backgrounds. If I click just on the yellow shirt, it's going to delete with 52% opacity because that's what I have selected for my fill. That's how it's going to delete it. Now notice if I zoom back out again, I'm going to click the minus. Notice what happens if I click back on my magic eraser and I say, okay, don't make it contiguous where everything's next to each other. I'm going to click off and then click on the yellow, and it's going to get rid of yellow in all different sections of my picture. So you just have to be careful on what you have clicked on. And so if I really wanted to go full strength again, I would just go at 100%, click it on, and keep trying to get all the yellow in the picture. And of course, you know, I could go ahead and get rid of just about all of it. This was with my magic eraser. Okay, let's go back up in history and just go click back on the primary Students at the Capitol copy to go back to our original file. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Now on to adding a gradient. You already know how to add a gradient, except you may not know that you can't add a gradient onto a layer that has text. When you add a gradient, however, basically what you're doing is you're specifying colors to blend within the gradient. And I also would like to just review some of the options with you. So very quickly, let's select Dominic's yellow shirt again. So I'm just going to do that by using my magic wand. I have my tolerance set at 32. I can go ahead and say New Selection, click onto it, and I'm just going to hold down Shift to add to the selection, just kind of quickly. And I'm going to say, okay, this will be good enough. Again, I can go into Quick Mask if I want to, grab my brush, make sure that I have the black and white so I can add the white, and quickly just make sure his shirt is selected. But again, do not worry about a precise selection. If this were an assignment, you'd worry about it, but at this particular moment in time, let's just move forward. Next, go back to standard mode, and we have the semblance of a selection going on here. And what I would like you to do is grab your gradient, which is directly above your paint bucket, and please change your foreground color to like a blue. I'm just going to choose a lighter kind of blue today. I'm going to make it in gamut. Now I have my lighter blue. Look up at the top of your options bar. If I change it to normal, that means that it won't have any modes on it whatsoever. My opacity is set to 77%. If I change it up to 100%, it will be 100% of the strength of the gradient. I'm just going to keep it at 77 with normal, and I'm going to brush across the gradient. Notice that it takes on both the foreground and background colors with the gradient. So that's possibly something that maybe you didn't 100% realize as well. Unless, of course, I choose a gradient that otherwise constrains me to a specific color. It's going to use both foreground and background. I'm going to choose the second gradient in, that's foreground to transparent, and I'm going to undo my last quick mask mode. Go to quick mask, and here we go. Now I only have, it's a gradient that goes from the blue to transparency. So it's going to show through some of the yellow that's currently there. I'm going to deselect, and it shows just a lighter color on his shirt. Had I made a better selection, it actually might look kind of cool. Now let's go on. You already do know definitely the paint bucket. That's something that we've used before. If we can go back up in history from before we had our gradient to when we exited quick mask again, and we have our selection already saved. In fact, let's do that. Let's just say select, save selection, and this is a new channel. Let's just call this shirt. This is our shirt channel. Say OK. So now if we looked at channels, we would see it has the shirt. Go back into layers, and you're going to see that the shirt, if we use the paint bucket, well, there you go. Suddenly I have a fill that just does my foreground. And notice that I have to fill some of the areas a little bit more than once, again, because of the fact of the intensity. I only have it at 50% of my opacity, and I have my tolerance range at 32 for the fill colors. Next, let's go back up to the original photograph, Students at the Capitol copy, and work from there. Next, we go on to using the dodge tool to lighten faces. Let's go over and see that the dodge tool is the very first tool right next to the burn. And when you press and hold, it's dodge, burn, and sponge. Okay? When you use the dodge tool, you want to make sure that you have the right range. Are you looking for shadows? Are you looking for it to lighten in a mid-tone or just to highlight? I'm going to say mid-tone because I want to zoom in on Pam's face here. So I'm going to get my zoom. Just want to zoom in right here, and let's get a nice close-up of Pam's face. Maybe go back a little bit. And now when you go back to your dodge tool, notice you can go to 100% exposure, but really I would highly encourage you to go more to like 20%. If you wish to enable your airbrush capabilities just for that more subtle approach, go right ahead and do that as well. Now I'm going to try to just lighten the side of her face a little bit. Now watch, I'm going to press and hold my mouse the entire time without ever releasing it until I get the whole section that I'm looking to touch. Now, you can see that in some areas It really gave too much of a white look. So what I want to do is edit Fade the Dodge tool. I'm going to try to fade at 50% and see how it looks now. There I go, much more natural, yet lighter. I'm going to say OK. Now remember, I had to hold down the tool the whole time. If I release it, that's fine. I just have to immediately do the fade after that. Now that you've learned about dodging the tool, let's talk about burning, so that it darkens this light spot that's on her. Right underneath the dodge is the burn. I'm going to just hold and drag and go down over it. Now watch as the more you do this, it starts to really almost burn her skin. So you got to be careful. Even though my exposure is on 20 and my range is at mid-tones for this particular burn tool, still it really, really is touchy. Let's go up to Edit, Fade the Burn tool, and again I'm going to try a 50%. This time I burned so much I need to go more to 30, possibly even 20 because it's still showing the black portion. Say OK. And again, it's a series of, I'm going to have to reduce my brush a little bit, and it's a series of being patient, and you have to do it a couple more times. And you just have to be really careful not to overdo it. But eventually, by using the burn tool and other methods, whether it be the color replacement, whether it's the patch or the healing brush, whatever the case might be, there are other ways of fixing this that we'll get to in just a moment. So let's go on to, next up, the sponge. Before we do this, let's move back, go to our original photograph, Students at the Capitol. And this time, we're going to use the sponge, which basically will increase our color intensity. Think of jeans. If you were trying to fade them, you would desaturate the jeans and you would take out some of the color intensity. But let's say you were trying to brighten some curtains that had kind of faded in the sun. Then you would saturate them to try to bring back their crispness. All right, with that in mind, please click View, Fit on Screen, and let's see if we can't make this technology little logo here come out a little bit more than it does. Let's zoom in to that technology sector, and let's go ahead and choose our sponge, which is directly beneath the burn tool. Again, if we say desaturate, that's going to fade it. We don't want to fade it. We want to saturate it, which will make it crisper. Now I have my flow rate set at 50% and my airbrush on. You may choose what you want. I'm going to increase, just for the purpose of the video, really increase my brush size so it's easier for you to see it and easier for me to do it. Watch as I click into, it becomes brighter and brighter, but I can really overdo it. See how it's changing the color of the shirt in that area? So again, I'm going to use the Edit Fade. I'm going to try to fade it to more of a 70% this time and see if it does it. Well, it's better, but I still think I need to go more to 60%, and it's a little more natural, but it's crisper. Now what if I didn't want that to come out crisper? I wanted it to fade in a little bit. Let's go back in the sponge tool, back up to the original Students at the Capitol. Let's see what happens when we click on our mode to desaturate. This time, notice it's washing out the shirt, so it's almost like fading the shirt and the emblem out. Again, I can edit and fade it, but I'm going to have to do it to more 20%. And there I go. It is slightly faded though, and it did fade my shirt. I'm going to keep it on saturate because that's the standard mode. And let's go ahead and continue. The clone tool and also onto the healing brush tool. First off, they're very similar, but there's just a couple of basic differences. The clone tool is like, it's just copying pixels from another area of the image, versus the healing brush, it is basically blending pixels from a sample area. Now that we've gone back in history and the Students are at the Capitol copy is selected, go ahead and zoom in on your timestamp a bit. And let me see, I'm going to change to the plus zoom. Okay. And I want you to see the difference between two different types of tools, the clone stamp and the healing brush tool. Let's start with the clone. We're going to try to get rid of our time date stamp. So let's do this. Let's click on the clone first. And remember that in order to activate the clone, you hold down your Alt key and you click above to a selection area. Now let's just go over the one and see what happens. Well, notice I have my opacity at 100% and my flow rate at 50%, which may be different than yours. I wasn't able to finish all the red beneath the first one, so I'm going to go back up, hit Alt, click again, and then swipe across to get rid of the rest of it, and it's gone nicely. That worked really well. It's just it may take a little patience sometime. Now let's work on showing you the difference between that and the healing brush. So go back up to your original file in history, click it to bring back the one. Go back to your healing brush. That the clone tool just makes copies of pixels from another area, but the healing brush is a blended pixel. So let's see what it's going to do. We select our healing brush, we find our area, and then we say Alt, click again. Now watch as I swipe over the one. See how it kind of blends the pixels together? It blends the yellow pixels, kind of blends a little bit on the red. So sometimes as I'm getting rid of it, I may get a blending. See, notice those little tips of red coming down here now. So I have to hit Alt click again and kind of blend these ending pixels. And voila, it works well too. It just sometimes the blend you may desire, and sometimes you may just desire a simple copy. There you go. That's the difference. Not that hard to do. Make sure you've gone all the way back up into your history palette and that you have clicked back on Students at the Capitol copy. Get your whole date stamp, time stamp thing back. Now, you ready? Here is my favorite all-time tool. I can't help it. I just love this tool, the patch. Instead of the healing brush, go right beneath it and choose the patch tool. I just think it's awesome. Notice that we're going to start where we have to circle the source. So the patch source from the destination. What that means is we want to circle what we want to get rid of. So that's the source. So let's circle, let's just say 1146 here. Circle all the way around it. Yeehaw! Lasso that baby. Now go in, grab it, and drag it up to the area that you would like it to replicate. And voila, you are done. Isn't that awesome? Try it with AM. Circle AM. Woohoo! You doggy! And go on over, and I am done. Now I could continue to do this and have much, much fun, but of course it would waste your time. But isn't that great? And that was so simple to do. It works sometimes with the patch. Basically, you just drag the lassoed area to be fixed over to another area that you would like to mend it with. Okay, deselect, go back up in history to the original file. Next, we're going to talk about doing a color replacement, and to do this, we're going to do it on Dominic's teeth. So let's say View, Fit on Screen. Let's find those pearly whites of his. Let's zoom in on them. Oh yeah, he's going to look good. There we go. And we're going to feel good about this. Zoom right in. And now let's begin this is actually a replacement. It's your color replacement tool. Let's go ahead and make a selection. I'm going to get my magic wand. My tolerance is at 32. And I'm just going to briefly, ooh, that's not good. Select some of his teeth. There we go. And now I'm going to use my quick mask. And I have to make sure my white is on top for my selection. Grab my brush. And I'm going to choose even some of these teeth over here. Get in between. Make sure we get the full tooth over here. Some of this in a second I'll know wasn't supposed to be selected. So I will work on that by getting out my, yep, that wasn't supposed to be chosen. So now I will switch and get rid of some of this with the black. I'm masking it. So I switched my foreground and background so I could mask a little bit more of it. But like always, I would need tiny little pixels, and I'm going to go ahead because of the fact that this is indeed a training video. Now that I have a general outline of his teeth, what I want to do now is I'm going to go into Image, Adjustments, Color, Replace Color. Now, it's showing me a basic color here. I could try to go in and choose a color, but notice it's kind of dirty, kind of dingy. So I'm going to click just a different color, not a true white, but something close to it, and say OK. Then I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to go to my color replacement tool, which is the last tool under the healing brush. And it doesn't matter how big your brush is. I'm going to swipe it across. There we go. And notice it looks really kind of almost dingy white. So I'm going to say Edit, Fade the color replacement. Let me fade it to about a 75 and see how that's going to look. Well, maybe a little bit more, maybe to a 65. I like that better. Say OK. And now that I have my 65% opacity, I'm going to deselect. I'm going to say View, Fit on Screen, and now notice you really can tell his teeth are much brighter than they used to be. Even if I zoom in a little bit on him, just look at the difference between Pam's teeth and his teeth, and they were almost identical to each other beforehand. So his are clearly whiter, but not to the point that it shows it as being fake. Very good. Give yourself a round of applause, And you are ready now to do all the activities and finish all the activities within Unit 6. Enjoy.